To editor. We're going to read it again. Note to editor. At the beginning of each chapter, I would like to make a suggestion. Depending on the work or what we have to work with in each individual chapter of this book, we should put definitions for each pictograph and or each ideogram. Each definition for each ideogram and each pictograph should have been placed at the beginning of each chapter, but I wrote the book myself without any help, as you can see, and we just didn't have time to do that. We being I, myself, and me. In any given instance, meanings out of the pictographs or ideograms themselves may very well be slightly different or completely different from what they meant in a different chapter based on the subject material. In other words, these symbols that appear on the $1 bill and the words that associate themselves with in the Bible itself, in this case the book of Revelation, are dynamic in that they change according to the necessary material that you're working with and the concept that this energy wanted to be interpreted at the end of times, so that it would never be interpreted prematurely until you understood the codex, which is the codex that I just described, having the symbols, having the dynamics to be able to change according to the subject material itself. They aren't the crystalline nature of the $1 bill. The word one means to magnify the word one, as in magnify the Lord, but it also does other things in different parts of the Bible. It even speaks of a sea of glass. The sea of glass is of a crystalline nature. So there you have two definitions for the same icon or iconology. That's why I wanted to put in each chapter what they meant, but I simply didn't have time. Note to self. After contacting almost 25 people, no one is interested in my concept. So everything, including the editing work with the pictures, will have to be done solely by myself. And it was. Even after describing the concept and explaining that it can be accomplished, not a single religious organization or evangelical or evangelicist organization on earth that I sent emails to or verbally communicated with, telephone conversation after telephone conversation, and no one was even slightly interested in my concept, because I didn't have a degree stating I understood religion from some nonsense college that quantifies supposedly a person as educated someone as educated in the studies of religion and theology. I ask you, what college did Jesus Christ go to? I ask you, what college did Jesus Christ go to? I'm not comparing myself with Christ. I'm just comparing myself with these theologians who, if in fact they were so smart, why have they not been able to interpret a lousy 22 chapters of a book after reading it 3 trillion times? This is a note of something I did when I was 25 years old and before. Note, 3 years in a Zen Buddhist monastery studying religion, 10 hours a day, and an additional 14 years in private study of the arts, and they would have me believe that this counts for naught. In other words, these so-called scholars that wouldn't allow me to have even the slightest bit of credit for being able to interpret the Bible, when in fact I studied these things longer and harder under greater and more mystic people than they ever could have, and they considered my studies for naught. What a joke. If I could list each and every one of them, I would. But then it would be either slander or libel. And that being the case, the only way I can describe who I contacted this by saying that I contacted the largest and most successful 25 or so of the televangelists and Christian book publishing companies in America and Europe. 25 of them, folks. 25. This is precisely the type of ignorance that I have had to deal with for the last 20 years. What if I am correct and all of these people are incorrect? What does that make me? Well, I think I made a video describing that aspect. At this point, I would like to say that this example that I am using below, aka the 7 stars example, was written 10 days before I got to verse 20 to give a description of what I believed the first 20 verses in the book of Revelation meant. I wrote a full description of these 7 stars as a kind of primer to writing the definitions and interpretation of the book of Revelation. And these 7 stars turned out to be the most significant aspect of the book of Revelation. And without the understanding of what these 7 stars are, it would be impossible to interpret the rest of the book of Revelation itself. In other words, I basically randomly chose a verse to utilize as nothing more than an example as to how a certain word or phrase could be interpreted differently than the average person in the world would normally do so. As it turns out, it was the most important verse in the entire Bible, and I am not over-exaggerating that fact, because it is the verse that allowed me to find Kings chapter 6, verse 31, which is the second greatest pictograph that appears on the reverse of the $1 bill and is described in great detail in a different segment of this book. The one indisputable truth on earth is that the artifact in my possession was sacred, and in all likelihood several thousand years old. It actually took several days to create the description of verse 20 below, because I was working from nothing but the reality of it is that I was describing what I believed the first 19 verses meant. And this below description is copied and pasted word for word, character for character, as the description for verse 20, and I didn't change one iota of it except for a couple of individual characters. And the date was 9/1 of 2009. In other words, the very first verse that I chose to interpret regarding the book of Revelation turned out to be the most important verse in the entire book of Revelation, and it was interpreted, except for a few individual spelling errors, perfectly in the first time. And actually, that's how it turned out, folks. It was actually interpreted as good as I would ever get it on the first time. Verse 20. This is the verse. But now, before we even begin, I want you to read verse 20 several times and see that God itself is explaining the mystery of the 7 stars. You will see that God / John is telling you that the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. That the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. At which point you must understand that now God itself has explained to you that the word stars have a minimum of 3 distinct different meanings. The word stars have a minimum of 3 distinct different meanings. And I say that this is the way the entire book of Revelation and all the other prophetic books in the Bible were written. No one single word has any one single meaning. And where it fits to change those individual words, it is not up to God to explain how, when, where, or why, but rather it is up to the individual to do the research to find out something that represents the words and can substantiate the theory behind the methodology and explaining